Hello and welcome to Managing Your HPF Project Grant. I am James Albee of State Tribal Local Plans and Grants, and I am the one who will be producing this live event. The rest of our team will be presenting and taking questions from you all. If you have questions for us, you must use the Q&A chat functionality. There's no method for us to be able to unmute you and let you speak. So ask your questions through the Q&A chat, and you are welcome to do so at any time. And we will try to provide a textual response to your questions promptly. And then at midpoints, we will go over those questions audibly for the rest of everybody at large. Thank you much. Now to Megan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Brown. I'm the Chief of the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division, which we fondly call Steel Pig. And I am happy to have this wonderful team with me today to present to you about managing what for many of you is your brand new Historic Preservation Fund project grants. We have a variety of different competitive grant programs on this live presentation with us. So we're going to try to answer all of your questions the best we can. And for those that we don't, please, as James said, please enter those into the chat. Okay, so let's get going. So just a reminder that this session is being recorded. Do submit your questions through the chat box, and we are going to be going over your major grant requirements. And also, to remind you that we're going to be sharing the recording and also the PowerPoint with you afterwards. So as you move through the PowerPoint, note that any of the websites are hot linked and they're in blue, so you can get to the different resources that we're sharing with you. Some important takeaways that we hope you get today is knowing about your grant agreement. It really is the foundation document that will make this whole process happen. For those of you that have received yours and signed it and sent it back to us already, thank you. For those of you that are still waiting on yours, when you do receive it, we do appreciate it if you can quickly sign that and move it back to us. We are having to do that all digitally as our office is still on homebound status. But if you could just make that a priority when you do get the agreement. And of course, if you have any questions, let us know. We're also going to give you some best practices for how to deal with your grant files, both paper and electronic. Talk about how to handle financial and procurement procedures. And then hopefully get across to you to know to contact your Park Service grant manager if you ever have any questions. That's really our role in the process. That's why we're here, to help guide you through the grant process, and know that we're here as a resource. If ever you're unsure, you can always submit a draft to us, and that goes for almost anything that you'll be doing throughout the grant process. Getting help from professionals is a key part of managing a federal grant. So it might be help with your financial, your audit. It could be an architect, it could be a historian, those types of things. But our staff is here to help guide you when you might need more expertise. And then one of the big things that we're all going to be facing this fall is actually the Park Service is changing financial systems, which is always a fun event for us. Not really, but so in September and October, we will be moving from our current financial system into grant solutions. Now, some of you may have used this with other federal grants, and if so, then you know more than we do right now. But there will be a time when doing modifications and accessing the grants will be a little bit difficult for us during September and October. However, you will never lose access to the funding from the drawdown system. So I think given that most of y'all are new grants and will just be starting out, this won't affect you quite as much as the grants that we already have going, but we want to make sure that you're aware of it. So just a little background on the Historic Preservation Fund. The HPF, as we fondly call it, was established in 1976, 10 years after the National Historic Preservation Act was established. And really the intent of the fund was to help provide money to do all the things that we wanted to do in the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. The fund is authorized up to $150 million per year. It does have to be appropriated by Congress, however, and we've never received the full amount each year, but we're getting awfully close because we have a lot of grant programs these days. One of the things I like to make sure that you understand is this funding is actually derived from offshore oil and gas lease revenues. So it's not tax dollars. And the real idea is being that the extraction, the destruction of one resource, some of that funding is put back into the preservation of another irreplaceable resource like your historic and cultural resources. We do have specific requirements for all grants awarded through the Historic Preservation Fund. We'll be touching on some of those throughout the program today. And then we, just as to kind of let you know what happens with that fund, a large part of that fund, almost $50 million, actually supports 59 state historic preservation offices across the country, 194 tribal historic preservation offices, and over 2,000 certified local governments. So that's a big piece of what the fund does. But in addition to it, Congress may also appropriate competitive project funding, which is what you have applied for and successfully been awarded. And that's also awarded directly by the Park Service to state, tribal, local governments, and nonprofits. So let's touch on some important sources of information and places to look for guidance when you need it, and things to be aware of. So the first thing is your grant agreement. We already touched on this. It's kind of the overlying document, statutory kind of thing for your grant project moving forward. And it incorporates all the requirements that come from the federal government, the Office of Management and Budget, the National Park Service, the Department of Interior, and the Historic Preservation Fund. This is a Department of Interior template that we are required to use. So making a lot of alterations to it is difficult for us. So do take that into account when you're reviewing it. It is the way the Department of Interior ensures that we're complying with 2 CFR 200, which is OMB's overall guidance for financial assistance and how federal funds are awarded. So that's an important place to be aware of. And for civil rights, Save America's Treasures, tribal heritage grants, underrepresented grants, Paul Broom grants, there are HPF specific requirements, and those have been bundled into your grant agreement as attachment A. So most of what you're seeing in the large part of the document is kind of boilerplate template, and then when you get to the attachments, those are the more specific sections that relate to your project and that grant program. So I mentioned 2 CFR 200. This is uniform guidance that's been established for all federal awards, and it's good to be familiar with it. It is a large document, and if you're having trouble sleeping, it might be the place to turn. But it is something that you need to be able to look up, be aware of, know that if you have a question that you need to go there. It is where we turn for the authority and rules and regulations when it comes to financial assistance. This went into effect in December of 2014, so in federal government terms, it's still relatively new. But we're definitely following the pieces of it now. The other 2 kind of places to look for guidance is our Historic Preservation Fund Grant Manual, which can be found online. And this helps outline eligible costs, how the program deals with certain types of reviews and those types of things. Also the Secretary of the Interior standards for archaeology and historic preservation. So these are national guidelines that are produced by the Park Service for the Secretary of the Interior to guide a variety of different actions, from historic preservation planning to treatment of historic properties, which is probably one, if you're doing a construction project, you're going to work very closely with, to professional qualification standards that might define what kind of skills and experience a historian needs to have for you to hire them for your project. So just be aware that there are over 10 sets of them, and different ones will apply to your project, but we will help point you to which one is effective. As a reminder, these are the places to find more information on grant management on our own website. So you can see we have information on reporting. That's a site we've recently worked on and streamlined, and hopefully have some new worksheets up there for you to make the reporting process easier. We also have sample documents that you can look to for examples of what you're needing to do. We have had guidance coming through the Office of Management and Budget that is related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and there's guidance there on our website. This can affect things like if there are delays in reporting because of COVID effects, extensions, those types of things. So if you are having something like that, do let us know. ASAP is the payment software that system that you will be using, and we have good guidance at gomps.gov/pay on how to sign up for ASAP. You will have to sign up to draw down your funding if you haven't, so do take a look at that site. And then, as I mentioned before, the transition into grant solutions. So we have some information on that. It's actually one of the Department of Interior's web pages, so a place to look for finding out how that is going. And then if you're working with one of our grant programs, we encourage you to look at the program site and hopefully gain a little bit more insight. Look at the other projects that were funded, know what great company you're in and how many different grantees you competed against to get this award. So probably one of the most important slides in this presentation will be who is your grant management specialist in our office. And we have a wonderful team with great experience. You should know by now and have gotten contact from one of your grant managers, but here's their information. And I encourage you to reach out to them, talk with them if you have questions. Don't guess, that's why they're there, for your help. And then when you're sending us information, we actually prefer that you use our general grant inbox, which is steelpig@nps.gov. This enables the entire team to receive any information you're sending. So if one of us is out or sick, the other team members can cover for them. So just kind of keep that in mind as a great way to keep in contact with us. In addition to the grant managers, you're stuck with me as your agreements officer. We have a brand new program assistant, Dara Green, that's joined us. We're excited about that. If you're doing a construction project, you will be working closely with Olivier Brunet and Jennifer Wellock for NEPA and 106. And also our financial contractor, Maisha, is part of our team. So, and again, there's that main box to use as the best way to get in touch with us. Okay, quickly, let's just run over what's some kind of the beginning part of that grant agreement, and then the rest of the team I'll go through some other aspects. So one of the things that you've likely seen from staff already is a statement of work and a draft budget. Maybe you've gone back and forth and worked with them on some changes. Sometimes going through the review process, the panel will recommend things for your project, or maybe there's elements we can't pay for, and those can result in some changes to that scope of work or the budget in that way. And so definitely, look to that statement of work in your grant agreement as kind of defining what this project is going to be. And also know that it can be modified. So you may get into a project and have some discoveries that means we need to maybe alter the work we're doing to that building. Maybe we need to focus on a different area. Maybe we have remediation. Maybe you get a great deal from a consultant and you're able to do more work, and we're able to expand your scope of work. So know that these elements of the grant agreement can be modified, and those are done through a modification request. We do encourage you to do that when you do your reporting, which is every 6 months, because that makes it a little easier on you and on us. The budget is, of course, your best guess at what this project is going to cost. You did in your application. We may have worked with you to redefine that a little bit further. We also expect the budget to change, and that's probably a place we see the most modifications happen to. We have separated out in the budget and your grant agreement the federal and the matching share. If matching share is required, or you said you are going to provide it, then it does have to be there. So make sure that that is documented and it meets all the same rules as the federal share. One of the key things to remember about the Historic Preservation Fund is by statute, no more than 25% of the total budget, so that's the federal share plus the matching share, can be used for administration and indirect costs combined. And we're going to talk about that more, but I just want to point that out as a key factor. So that is why in your budget, we break out your administrative costs and track those throughout the project. And again, remember, these can be modified, preferably with your interim report, but that is an option. And then the start and end dates are outlined in the very beginning of your grant agreement. And this is important for most of you. If you're doing a history project, we're starting you out with about 2 years, construction project about 3 years. We do fully anticipate that you may need an extension. Those are usually given for from 6 months to 1 year at a time. We do ask that you request those extensions at least 3 months before your grant expires, because sometimes we may have trouble extending it otherwise. So that's an important thing to remember. Okay, I am going to turn this over to Madeline Kahns to discuss the deliverables that you'll be producing with your projects. Madeline?
Hi, everybody. My name is Madeline Kahns, and I'm a grants management specialist here at StillPig. I deal with tribal heritage grants, civil rights grants, and SAT project grants. So I'm going to talk to you about deliverables. These are in your grant agreement, and they include public notices, grant products, and reporting. Okay, on slide 18. Many of you have already, as Megan said, many of you received your grant agreement, and so with that email, you may have noticed that we asked you to place a public notice in your local paper regarding the project. Many of you have already done this. We asked this in a way of informing the public that MPS as a federal agency is assisting with this project. So please make sure that you've done this or sent out a press release because it's pretty important to us. Also, anytime you publish anything, whether it's a flyer on your project or perhaps a report that is part of the project, you need to make sure that you include the disclaimer that we have listed here. This disclaimer is also in your grant agreement. You should also submit a draft to MPS for approval of any of these things that you are going to publish or that you're going to give out to the public for publication or distribution. We ask that you do not use the MPS arrowhead logo on anything. You can use it on the project sign that's required that you need to place in front of your building if you're having a construction project. But even in that case, there is a certain format, and we will touch on that later in the presentation. Also, please invite us to any events you have. Perhaps somebody important from the MPS can show up and join in with your event. So don't forget us there. Okay, let's move on to grant products. Grant products are anything that is required in your scope of work. That could be oral histories, National Register nominations, perhaps you're doing a film, etc. Any project like that. In preservation projects for construction, that would also include plans and specs of the project, and those should be submitted at about 80% completion, and certainly prior to any work being started. Products dealing with construction at the final report would include photos of before and after related work. Other drafts, such as nominations, transcripts, or films, should also be submitted in draft form prior to finalization so that MPS can approve those before you submit them. Review can take some time, especially when we're dealing with plans and specs, because there are a lot of preservation construction projects out there. So please keep that in mind with your timeline. You need to allow for maybe up to 3 months to get those reviewed. Okay, we can move on to reporting, which is everybody's favorite. Most project grants are required to send in an interim project progress report every 6 months. You can send those via email to the SteelPig email, or you can send them directly to your grant manager. Whether any work has been completed or not, you must submit that. That includes a financial report, and that is called a SF425. And we have the link up there. You can click on it and find those reports every 6 months until the project is completed. All the reporting periods are listed in your grant agreement and are due 30 days after the end of that reporting period. And that's listed there too. It's very clear at the reporting period and then the end date when the report is due. Please note these dates in your calendar. Reporting is federally mandated and it's very important. You do not want to become non-compliant, or it may affect your funding, or it may affect the funding on a future grant that you may apply for. So make sure to keep that in mind when you're going through your grant process. A final report and any deliverable are due 90 days after the grant has ended, and that's the end date on your grant agreement. Please provide a detailed report. Since we are not there in person, the reports give us an idea of how the project is progressing. So it's really important to provide as much detail as you can, especially on construction projects. Send in photos. This is also a time to let us know if you have any issues or delays, and we can help. We're here to help, and if there's problems, don't be afraid to let us know. At this time, you can also report requested amendments such as budget or scope change, and this can all go in the interim report. That way it's all notated and we can see it as we're reviewing. Please include photos, not just for construction projects, for any of your other projects. We use these for reviewing the work, but also to share the good work that you're doing out there and for our social media. Just to promote you and to promote our programs. Okay, so here's some information that you want to keep track of throughout your throughout your project. These will help us when you report them on the final report. Metrics on employment, access to site information, tourism, partnerships are helpful. These show us how historic preservation contributes to the economy and to the well-being of all communities. We have a list there, a link there for helpful metrics that you may want to look at. Okay, I'm going to start covering some financial requirements. I'm going to go through the first three. That's allowable costs, indirect and administrative costs, and matching share. And then I'm going to turn it over to my coworker, Jamitra Roan, to cover the risk level and the ASAP payment system. Allowable costs. These must be necessary, allowable, allocable, and reasonable. Necessary means that costs are required. These are costs that are required to complete the grant project as stated in your grant agreement. For example, under a grant to repair a roof, you ask to purchase a new interpretive sign to highlight the significance of the property. While that might be helpful, it's not necessary to repair the roof. So you would have to check with your grant manager to make sure that that is something that we would allow. Allowable costs are listed under 2 CFR 200 or the grants manual. This is 2 CFR 200 is a very good place to look for allowable costs because almost everything is listed there. But the manual also has some things that we will not cover. And an example would be your completing a phase 3 archaeological survey, which includes excavation. While that might be helpful to the project, the grants manual states that funds may not be used to work at phase 3 work, which includes excavation. So it would not be allowable. That's just an example. Check with your grant manager. Allocable is a cost that's assigned directly to the grant project that you can easily understand. For example, if you are charging if you want to charge costs to rent, that would be difficult to, and it includes rent for all other parts of your organization. That would be difficult to determine what part of the rent is an allocable cost to your grant project. Sometimes these costs are included in indirect costs though, so that's different. Reasonable costs must not exceed that which a prudent person would pay under the same circumstances at the time of the decision was made to incur the cost. For example, a lawyer volunteering to stuff envelopes shouldn't be charging the regular lawyer's fee. They should be charged a fee that somebody would be charged to stuff envelopes. Or an example is the $1,000 hammer. That is not a reasonable cost and it's not competitive pricing. You can also charge things like the project sign to the grant. That's for mostly construction projects where we require you to put a project sign in front of your building to advertise, not to advertise, but to note that we are paying for this project. Also, equipment is eligible. Equipment is considered a $5,000 per item piece of equipment. That might be like a vehicle or a GIS system. And you may need those to complete the project, but MPS needs to approve those before purchasing. So if you have a large piece of equipment that you want to purchase that isn't already in your budget and approved, then you would need to speak to your grants manager. Here are some unallowable costs, and these are common things. You can check 2 CFR 200 to make sure that, or the grants manual to see if those are covered. Things such as fundraising or lobbying or travel costs that exceed the federal per diem rate, those are not allowable costs. You can check the per diem rate. We have the link right there at gsa.gov, and they have those costs, so you can make sure that you're following those requirements. Everybody's favorite, indirect costs. Indirect costs are only allowed if your organization has an indirect cost rate agreement. You have submitted that with your grant agreement, so it's mostly, with your application, so it's mostly in your grant agreement already. If this changes, please submit a new one to your grant manager because it must match those figures that you report on the Federal Financial Report SF 425. The 10% de minimis rate should have already been approved and is listed in the agreement. And this is only available to those organizations who have never had an approved indirect cost rate before. If you have the de minimis rate, you must track those costs carefully. And you can find more information in the 2 CFR 200 regarding indirect costs or de minimis costs. Okay, we'll move on to administrative costs. Excuse me. These can be confusing, and I get more questions about administrative costs than almost anything. And you can read the definition here, but basically, administrative costs are generally related to finance work. For instance, if an employee outside of the project does payroll for the whole organization, you can charge the amount of time that they spend to do payroll for your project specifically, if it's not already included in an indirect cost rate. Another example is perhaps there's a grant manager who takes care of all the financial reporting for your organization, but not just your grant, but others that are unrelated. You can charge that salary as long as you have a specific amount of time that those people are doing that work. However, these types of costs must be accounted for in your approved budget. So you must make sure that they're in there, or if we need to adjust your budget and modify it to make sure that you have the right amount of indirect costs, administrative costs, please let us know. And again, as Megan mentioned earlier, you can only charge 25% for both indirect costs added together with administrative costs for the total grant budget. That includes the grant funds and any matching share. That's very important. Speaking of matching share, if required, and that will be in your grant agreement, this funding shares the same requirements as grant funding. So if it's not allowable on the grant side, it is not allowable on the matching side. Same rules and regulations for grant funds go towards matching shared funds. There may be a few different requirements, but check with your grant manager on those. You also cannot use other federal funds such as grants or matching share, except as noted here with the CDBG. If matching share is required in your grant agreement budget, you must report how much of it you have spent on your 425 when you're submitting your interim report. And it ideally should be spent at the same rate as the grant funding. I will now turn over the next slides to Demetra.
Good afternoon. I am Demetra Brown. I am a grant management specialist, and I will start from here with the grantee's risk level. And the risk level is done just to, it's really to help the grantee, especially a new grantee. Risk assessments will be completed prior to awarding funds, and it's based on the grantee's last single audit. And everybody doesn't have a single audit, because the single audit is done if you have $750,000 of federal money. Everybody doesn't have that. And the risk level is stated in the grant agreement as low, medium, or high. So in your grant agreement, you will know what your level is once you go through it. And the risk level and additional oversight are based on the grantee's ability to manage federal funds and the project type. The low risk is no additional requirements. Normally, this is a grant. This is a organization that has had a lot of federal money and have been doing it for a while. Medium risk is typically most, and they must submit a form, the SF-270 request for advance or reimbursement to MPS before you take down money. You will send this form and your grantee will give you the okay to take down the money. If you are medium risk, that's what you have to do. If you're high risk, you have to send the SF-270 with backup documentation to support the payment you're requesting. You have to submit that to your grant manager. They look it over and they will give you the approval to draw down the money. Next. The ASAP payment system, ASAP, which is known as ASAP. Grantees must be registered with MPS and the ASAP payment system for MPS to move grant funds into your account. Check to see if your funds are in your account after you receive your signed grant agreement from MPS. If you still need to register with MPS and ASAP, instructions are, you see the website. You will need to submit a form to your grant manager to register in ASAP. All registration steps must be completed within 45 days or you must start over again. I'm gonna repeat that. All registration steps must be completed within 45 days or you must start the process over. Grantees must go into their ASAP account every 60 days or ASAP will block the account. Call ASAP at the help desk to get unblocked. So I'm gonna repeat that part too. You have to go into ASAP every 60 days or you will be blocked. Managing grant funds. Funds must be managed in compliance with the generally accepted accounting principles, known as GAAP, and generally accepted auditing standards, known as GAGAF. Grantees must have financial policies in place to ensure funds are managed properly. If your organization doesn't have the necessary financial system in place, consider using an accounting or grant management firm to oversee the project funds. Less expensive than having to return grant funds due to mismanagement. Grantee must use grant funds to hire assistants in managing the grant or obtain training to support you in managing your grant. Procurement, consultants, and contractors. Special COVID-19 provisions. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, procurement procedures and contract work may be affected by state and local requirements and law. Check state and local requirements on procurement notices and be sure to follow them along with any other laws related to COVID-19. Print out and save in your files for auditing purposes. Access to National Park Service, property, personnel, or resources, as well as other organizations may be limited at the start of your agreement. In the event of a prolonged unavailability of resources, the agreement period of performance may be extended. Our office has consolidated guidance at the website listed. Federal procurement procedures. Non-state grantees should follow federal procurement procedures listed under 2 CFR 200.320, unless your procurement process is more strict. Check state and local COVID-19 policies regarding procurement and notices. And there's the link. State grantees follow their own policies under 2 CFR 200.317. Check state COVID-19 policies regarding procurement and notices. Documentation showing that the price is fair and reasonable is required for all purchases. Purchases should favor American minority-owned businesses. Okay, for procurement. These are the federal levels. Your procurement policy must reflect a current FAR or 2 CFR 200 regulations to use these levels. If your procurement policy or other matching share requirements have lower thresholds, you must follow those policies. Micro purchases. No competition necessary. Do not split up the cost of a single purchase into a smaller purchase in order to make it a micro purchase. And that's saying you have something that you know costs $6,000 and you try to send 3 bills for $2,000 each. You can't do that. Small purchases must obtain 3 or more prices. Document the vendors or suppliers contacted and their addresses, the price, the selected vendor, and how you arrived at the determination that the price is fair and reasonable. And the reason why you obtain 3 is because these are competitive grants. Procurement for sealed bids. Bids are publicly advertised and solicited, and a contract is awarded to the lowest in bidder. Competitive non-negotiation. Bids can be sought directly from the grantee. Bids do not have to be publicly advertised, but may be. Generally used when conditions are not appropriate for the use of sealed bids, such as when the selection is based on qualification rather than price. Can only be used in procurement A/E professional services. Non-competitive negotiation. As known as sole sourcing, this is the only person that can do what you need. This is a physical emergency and not enough time to run a competitive bid process. The item or service is only offered by a single vendor. After solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined inadequate. MPS approves the sole source request due to extenuating circumstances. This does not include, we've been working with the contractor of the project or the contractor has done the work on the project in the past. Go ahead. And when we say sole source, and we're saying, and I'm gonna give you an example, a lot of people don't I'm going to use the example of a lot of people don't do restoring windows. This is an example, and we know they do, and it's only one company that does it. That's the company you're going to use, and you're going to have to give the reason why you're using them, because a lot of companies don't do it, or they're the only companies that do it. And for the emergency situation, a tree fell down on the roof and you had to get it done like right away because the storm was coming. That's an example. Okay, next one. Procurement contract types. Federal acquisition regulations is FAR, part 16. The allowable is firm fixed price contracts. Contracts is a specific amount or price and cannot be adjusted even if the amount of work under contract is more or less than the originally thought it was going to be. The fixed incentive contracts. Contracts is a fixed price contract that allows for adjusting and establishing the final contract price by a formula based on the relationship of final negotiating total cost to the total target cost. Cost reimbursement contract, numerous types. Contract types is only suitable when uncertainties do not allow costs to be estimated with enough accuracy to use only of the fixed price contract types. Not used for acquisitions of commercial items, may only be used when the contractor's accounting system is inadequate for determining costs applicable to the contract, and or appropriate government surveillance during performance will provide reasonable assurance the effective method and effective cost controls are used. Unallowable costs. These are contracts, good or service acquired under them and not allowed for federal share or non-federal matching share expenses. Consultants and contractors. Contractors/consultants assisting with grant projects for non-administrative work should have qualifications that meet Secretary of Interior's professional qualification standards for fields: architectural, history, historic architecture, history, and archaeology. Submit a copy of the selected consultant/contractor's qualifications to your MPS grant administrator for review and concurrence prior to signing a contract. If a contract is paid by grant funds or match, make sure to retain a summary of competitive selection process. Maximum hourly wage charged to this grant for personnel and consultants may not exceed 120% of the salary of a federal civil service grade 15, step 10. You can go to the salary of OPMs to see that. Request for proposal. Project overview, your organization's background and principal contact. Project is funded by a federal grant. Project goals and target audience. Site map or other helpful project documentation. Scope of work, deliverables, timeline. Attach a copy of the grant agreement flow down. Technical requirements, Secretary of Interior standards for archaeology and historic preservation, the National Environment Protection Act, which is NEPA, project budget for contract types to be awarded, criteria for selection must allow for fair competition, format, and proposal timeline. I am going to turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Demetra, and good afternoon or good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Tinkham. I am another one of the grant management specialists here in the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division. So I just want to give everyone a heads up. We're about 9 slides away from a question break. Obviously, throughout this whole presentation this evening, you've been able to submit questions as we go. But if you've been holding on to them or just working on how to phrase your question, this is just a heads up that we'll be pausing for questions in a few slides. And with that, Megan, let's go on to slide 41 if we could. Thank you very much. Best practices, grant records, what should be in my grant files? So ultimately what we're looking for here is that your grant files tell the complete story of your grant. It is, of course, maybe some of the things that you would think of, like your grant agreement and any amendments, guidance and communication from our office, financial documentation, documentation of how you made certain choices related to consultants and contractors, the reports that you submit, any press release, as well as any materials related to public outreach connected to your grant. And so an example of that would be maybe one of the brochures that we were talking about earlier. So if you produce a brochure, not only does it have to have our grant, our funding acknowledgement on it, you also should make sure to save a sample copy for your grant file. And just to highlight the note that's there along the bottom of the slide, it's a good practice to save a copy of anything that you send to us. So that way you're able to document what you've sent and when you sent it in case there are any questions about reporting compliance. Thank you. Just continuing on kind of the additional quote unquote evidence that needs to be in your grant file. I also wanted to make sure that it was clear that you need to document things that you ended up not doing. Perhaps a vendor that you chose not to contract with or not to select, or maybe even some items that you looked at and you priced out and you decided they were too expensive. Well, by documenting what you didn't choose, that helps to reinforce the choice that you did make. Yeah, as I said before, we really want this documentation to tell the story of the grant. It should stand alone without you having to explain anything, whether that's procurement or staff time or any of the other actions that take place on the less administrative side of your grant. That's really what we are there to help you do, is of course the reporting and again the administrative side of your grant, but also providing that technical assistance to be able to assist you. One important thing to keep in mind, I think, is that by having a well-managed grant and a well-run grant, that will enable you to be a success story, not only from the perspective of the Park Service, but also to maybe some of your internal audiences. If you're a nonprofit, for example, that might mean your board of directors. If you're a state or a local government or tribal government, that could be other stakeholders that are in your community as well. And in addition, it enables you to be able to move as smoothly as possible through the audit practice. Thanks, Megan. I'm ready to move on. Okay, so the purpose of this slide is just to highlight that there is a difference between people that are considered personnel as defined in 2 CFR 200.40, and those are considered to be and those who are considered to be contractors. So a shorthand way to think about that is that personnel are only those who are receiving W-2s. And those W-2 employees are those on whom you need to keep the records that are generally discussed here. And under the personnel pay reports must section is just a brief outline of what you need to keep in mind when you are designing your documentation practices, but also things to make sure. that your software or at least practices allow for. And one that I would highlight there is making sure that if someone is not billing 100% of their time to this grant, that your accounting software allows them to kind of bill fractionally to multiple projects, so that it's very clear and you have the timesheet documentation backed up by the accounting software to be able to show whose time was charged to what. This is kind of the slide to remind you that zombies do exist. And what I mean by that is even after your grant closes, you're not quite done yet. So there could be a couple things that happen. One could be that you need to look back through your records for the grant, your well-kept grant records for the grant. So just make sure to hold on to those for a minimum of 3 years. Your internal policies may require a longer record retention schedule, and that's certainly fine from our perspective. And then, as Demetra was talking about, the receipt of this grant may push you over the threshold for the Single Audit Act. So not normally, always, the Single Audit Act is triggered by entities that expend more than $750,000 from any federal source in their fiscal year. And that is not related to receiving, it's related to expending. And more information on that is, of course, in the Single Audit Act, but a helpful summary is in 2 CFR 200 subpart F. Madeline mentioned this quite a few slides ago, but a project sign is a requirement for any construction project or for place-based non-construction projects. And we really would like to see the project sign up prior to the start of building, or if it's a non-construction project like an exhibit, a funding acknowledgement sign up throughout the life of the project. It's a little bit tricky, so I'll try and explain this in a way that is clear, but at a minimum, the project sign needs to include the Park Service funding acknowledgement that we mentioned earlier, but that is also in your grant agreement as well. And it should also have a way for the public to contact you. The project sign needs to be a durable material like aluminum, vinyl, or corrugated plastic, and needs to be a size that can be easily read from the public right of way. We're not in any way asking for a billboard, but for a construction or development project, an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper taped in the window is probably not going to meet that size requirement. You have 2 options to create a sign. Well, really 3 options to create a sign. One is to do one of your own design and just make sure that it includes the funding acknowledgement and your grantee contact information. So if you do that, we don't review it at all. If you would like to use a sign that includes the Park Service arrowhead, maybe let's go to the next slide, please. Then you have 2 options. So again, if you want to create your sign yourself and not use the Park Service arrowhead, you just need to include some text that is spelled out in your grant agreement. If you would like to use a project sign that does include the Park Service arrowhead, like this example here, then you need to either have the Park Service fonts, which we are not able to provide you, but if you have them, then we can give you an InDesign file and you can fill this out. What is most likely, and I think the simplest option for folks that would like to use the arrowhead design, is that we have a fillable PDF, and you will just type your data, like the project title, the vendor that you're working with, as well as the grantee name, into a fillable PDF and just print that out. The dimensions on our sign template are 3 feet by 4 feet, and it's designed to be printed on either aluminum, corrugated plastic, or vinyl. So I know that's a bit confusing, but I hope that did make sense. And with that, we are going to move on to the next slide, which is an opportunity for folks to ask questions. So we're going to pause for questions right now. Again, please make sure you're entering them in the Q&A chat section so that we can all see them and respond to them. And then after the flow of questions ebbs a bit, next up will be Marla Collum. But I'm going to stop speaking for now to give you all a chance to think about and focus on any questions that you have. But thank you very much, and we're definitely looking forward to working with you.
All right, I'm Lindsay Alston. I'm just going to be going over the questions that we've gotten through the Q&A so far that Ginger Carter and Jessica Kelly, two of our other grant management specialists, have been answering. The first we got was, are we allowed to show contractors the building before we sign the grant agreement? Yes, you are welcome to do that, but as Ginger said in her answer, please make sure that you follow the contracting requirements that Demetra just went over. Again, 2 CFR 200 rules all, so make sure you're following those. The next question, since funds are drawn down from asap.gov, can the financial report be submitted through ASAP, or must it be submitted directly to our grant point of contact, your grant manager? To that, we have to use your grant manager. You can email it directly to them, or you can email it to our main box. Again, that's stlpg at nps.gov. There is no way for us to get your SF425, that financial report, through ASAP. So you've got to send it just directly to us every time you have those interim reports due. All right, the next question was a multi-part question. How long do we need to advertise for bidding, and must the bids carry a fixed price? So the length of time will vary, and it can be discussed for your particular project with your grant manager. Procurement bids should always meet one of the allowable contract types, which will usually be a fixed price contract. Again, you can find the procurement standards in 2 CFR 200. If you just Google 2 CFR 200 procurement standards, it'll take you directly to that subsection. All right, someone asked, our city requires RFQs for professional services. Are we more strict than NPS? If your city requires them for all professional services, no matter the amount that will cost, then yes, that would be stricter than NPS and the general 2 CFR 200 guidelines. Again, you will get this PowerPoint and a recording of this presentation, so you can see that slide that talks about the numbers, and you can easily compare if you are more strict or not. Can grant funds be used to purchase the project sign? Yes, that is an eligible expense that you can charge to the grant. Can the project sign include other funders? Yes, there is a space on our template, or if you make your own, you are welcome to include other funders. And Ginger is currently answering the question, when can we expect the grant agreement? If you have not already gotten at least a draft scope of work and a draft budget, or your full grant agreement, you can probably expect that in the next couple of weeks. We are working on finalizing the last few of them. And from what I can see, oh, we got one more in. What are the number of bids we should request per project? Your typical number is going to be 3. It is not always 3, sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but usually the best practice is going to be to go for 3. And is there a template for calculating indirect cost rates? No, that is typically something that your accountant will likely have to do. That's not something that we are experts in, and that is a federally negotiated process. Otherwise, you'll have to use the de minimis if you've never had a negotiated rate. All right, I don't see any new questions coming in, so Marla, I will pass it on to you.
Hey, thank you, Lindsay. Hi, my name is Marla Collum, and I am a grants management specialist here at the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division of NPS. And I'm going to kind of talk a little bit more broadly about the 2 different types of projects that we fund through these competitive programs. So history projects and then preservation projects. And so we'll start with the history projects, and we've kind of themed them into these different categories. So survey is what you're doing when you're identifying and taking an inventory of historic resources. Nominations would be to the National Register of Historic Places. We support a lot of those types of projects. Oral history is recording the experiences associated with historic sites or events by interviewing people. And then exhibits and educational materials help provide interpretation of the historic resource or event. So starting with surveys and nominations, this would be for the National Register. You've seen this a lot. You need to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for survey and identification. And the work must be conducted, supervised, reviewed, verified by someone who meets those professional qualification standards. So again, we've talked about this quite a bit. When you're engaging the work of a consultant, or sometimes referred to as a contractor that might be doing some advising on the project, we want to see their qualifications. We want to know that they have preservation experience and a preservation ethic. So we like to see their resume and maybe some of their past projects that they've worked on. So one example we have here is an architectural historian. We want to see that they've got some experience in that field and that they would be the best person for your project. Survey projects also must meet the Cultural Resources GIS standards. So if you're working with any GIS projects, geographical information systems, make sure that you are referencing and following those standards. And then nominations need to result in a listing in the National Register prior to the closeout of the grant. So we actually want to see you complete that process. And then for oral histories, make sure if you're working on this type of project that you are very familiar with the Oral History Association, the OHA. Be sure to reference these standards and resources that are available on their website, and also the best practices that they have published and created. So work on oral history projects must be conducted by a person who meets the professional qualification standards, as we've talked about. And you also need a clear plan. So who is your audience? What type of outreach will you do? How will the research and documentation be used in the future? Under exhibits and education, so once again, here we are, the person leading or verifying the project must meet those professional qualifications. So again, send it to your grant manager, their qualifications and their professional experience so that we can review and approve that choice. And when in doubt, just send it to us so that we can take a look and give our approval on who you'd like to engage with. And very similar to oral history projects, you know, it's good to have a clear plan. Who's the audience and how will you disseminate the information once it's created and developed? So the Park Service needs to review your plans at 50 or 80% of completion. So as you develop your plans, you know, it might be worthwhile to have a conversation with your grant manager to determine just what is the most appropriate for your project and at what level should you submit those plans for review. And you must acknowledge the grant program that is supporting the project and make sure you're familiar with that sample language that's provided in your grant agreement. And then moving on to preservation projects, this is more the place-based, the historic resources projects that include things like planning, testing, physical repairs, what we often refer to as bricks and mortar projects. And so you can see those types of things that we're talking about, where it's a physical resource, a building, a structure. All work must meet the Secretary of Interior standards. So submit those plans and make sure they are approved before you begin any work on the project. And again, those links are widely available on our website, and we'll provide this presentation and more information about where you can reference those if you need to. So the Park Service is responsible for completing 2 different reviews of your project if it's one of those bricks and mortar projects. The first one is Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and then the National Environmental Policy Act. So Section 106 is the goal is that there would be no adverse effect on historic properties. And then for under NEPA, we're looking for no adverse effects on the environment. So plans and a NEPA worksheet will need to be submitted to us, and submit those items to your grant manager, and they can also provide you with that NEPA worksheet that does need to be completed for each project. And then if the project does involve any type of earth moving or demolition, make sure you're aware and follow the Secretary of Interior's archaeological documentation standards. A note about salvage. Make sure that you have a conversation with us before you do any salvage on your site. You cannot remove original fabric of the building that could be retained, for example. So that's just a note I wanted to make. But the profits, if you do sell any salvage from a project, do need to be reported as income that would offset the grant funding. And we talked a bit earlier about equipment purchases, so $5,000 or more. There are some requirements on disposition beyond the grant period. So again, that's another discussion you'd need to have with your grant manager if you are using the funds or the match for the purchase of equipment. And then processes for these reviews will be covered in more detail in a separate presentation. So we will be providing a separate, I believe a recording maybe, or another live event that focuses specifically on Section 106 and NEPA, and your grant manager will let you know when that's available or planned. So next we'll talk about easements and preservation covenants, and this is really what protects the grant assisted work and to ensure that the property is maintained beyond the life of the grant. So the funding through the HPF and under the Historic Preservation Act requires that grantees enter into a preservation agreement or covenant. And so the length of the easement is based on the amount of your federal award or the program that is funding the project. So this is something that you'd want to discuss with your grant manager. There's also a table in the HPF manual that kind of spells out those requirements. Generally, you're going to reach out to your state historic preservation office. That is the most common holder of easements, but you may be in a particular state where they do not hold easements. And if that's the case, you may need to approach a nonprofit organization, such as a statewide or local preservation organization that would accept the easement. So it must be executed and registered with the deed of the property. So in essence, it travels with the property. So if the property is sold, that easement is conveyed to the future owner. And we do need a photocopy of the executed agreement in order to close out the grant and prior to drawing down funds. So make sure you start this process early. It can take some time, and we want to know that you've got some progress being made within kind of the first year of your grant. And property owners, the consent of the property owner is required. So you do need to make sure that they are on board with signing the agreement, because that is a requirement. We do have a model easement that is available, or a template on our website, and also most SHPOs will have a template that they typically use that you could request from them as well. So again, the State Historic Preservation Office, or your SHPO, is typically the easement holder, but again, you may need to identify another organization or nonprofit that would accept it. And again, it goes with the property if it's sold, and if the property is state-owned, we do have a separate MOU process. So again, reach out to your grant manager if that is the case for your project. And to summarize, many of these items we've already discussed, but generally the sequence of grant requirements are as follows. The press release notification, make sure you submit a draft for review and acknowledge the funding source. See your grant agreement for that language. Submission of planning documents. So this is where we need the NEPA worksheet and your plans, so that you can allow time for that to occur before you start the work. And then your project sign. Seth talked in more detail about that. I just wanted to add that we also like to see a photo of the project sign installed and produced and on the site. So that's just another good way to provide that evidence that the project sign was created and posted at the site. And then submitting your consultant qualifications before you enter into any agreements with them. We need to review and approve that. And we like to see the draft easement. So again, just to make sure that that is in the works and that you're well on your way to having identified who will hold that easement. And then this slide is just kind of a more visual flow of work. So I think most of you on the call today are within these first two boxes, so to speak, of, the funds have been awarded, you're working on getting your grant agreements in place and reviewed and signed. So that's kind of where everybody is right now before, or some of you actually have them fully executed, I'm sure. So then moving on from there, if you are doing an RFP for a consultant, for example, we would be happy and would be required to review the RFP. You can send that to us before the procurement process begins. And then moving down, we will do those NEPA and 106 reviews. So just kind of take a look at this slide to kind of give yourself a good sense of what those requirements are and the general sequence of how this typically occurs. And a note about the very last kind of bubble at the bottom there, please do let us know of any events or public ceremonies so that we might attend or help support you in some way. And then most of these links are posted on our website or are easily, searchable and available. And again, we'll give you the PowerPoint presentation so that you have these links. But these are kind of the information that we've talked about repeatedly, and these are really invaluable resources as you go through your grant project and manage your grant. So lots of good resources here. So just wanted to make you aware that this list is a kind of consolidated list of those resources, and those are available to you as well. And now I'm going to, I guess, turn it back over to Lindsay for any final questions and a little bit of wrap up. So Lindsay, can I pass it back to you?
You certainly can, Marla. All right, so we've had a few questions come in since our last break. So the first was, how soon can we get started? You can typically start as soon as you have a copy of that executed grant agreements, although sometimes it takes 48 hours, maybe a little more if it's over a weekend, for those funds to appear in your ASAP account. Again, please make sure that you're paying attention to everything that requires pre-approval and anything you need to get approval from NPS for. The next question was, will these questions be available? Yes, we will send the PowerPoint, the recording, and the Q&A to everyone probably within a week or two. It might take us a little bit of time to get everything wrapped up. All right, must we do an additional sign if this is our second NPS grant? As long as this is a phase 2 of the same project, no, you can use the same sign and just have it up through phase 2 as well. If you would like to create another project sign for the additional funding, you are still welcome to charge those costs to the grant. All right, this was a specific question. For a film project, crew was provided. Do we have to bid them out? This is a very specific instance, but you can work with your grant manager, making sure that you can show that they were hired in a manner that meets the federal procurement requirements and they have the necessary qualifications. As long as that is the case, we can accept them. We had a little bit more of an in-depth question about the sign template. If we're able to adjust fonts, how do we get it photo ready? And if we make the sign prior to August 1st, can we use the costs as matching funds? So the font is not adjustable if you use our NPS sign template. Those are preset fonts, but you should be able to save the PDF and print from that. There's no traditional camera-ready artwork, but it is a fillable PDF. The fonts are just automatically there. Again, the cost of creating that can be charged to the grant, but if your grant doesn't start until August 1st, then you can't incur costs until August 1st comes around. Otherwise, those would be ineligible costs. Then we had a 106 question. Do we have to wait for our 106 review to be complete before we can submit our NEPA worksheet? No, you can submit them at the same time or as soon as it's completed. We can be doing those 2 reviews concurrently. So again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to submit them into that chat box. We'll hang on for a couple more minutes. But as you can see on this slide, you have our address, although please don't mail anything to us right now physically. We're not in the office and haven't been for 3 months now, so we can't get anything. Please make sure you're emailing it to us. We have a secure file transfer website. If you need to send something that doesn't fit in an email, you can just email your grant manager or that steelpig@nps.gov email to get a link to upload to that. And we also have a YouTube channel. You'll get the link when you get everything here. It's also in a lot of our email signatures. That YouTube channel has some small segmented training videos. So you can see a presentation on just procurement or just getting started on your grant. There are a few, I believe that they were sent out as links in your welcome email to this, and they'll be available again through our YouTube channel at any time.